I've got a question.
Okay, yeah, great.
And it's about moving between fiction and non-fiction. I think, Geoff, you've just adverted to the difficulty of, if you're known as someone who writes non-fiction and then you write fiction, do people confuse the character Geoff with you? And Elif, you said you began wanting to be a fiction writer and you've now found your voice in non-fiction. Do you anticipate that you'd like to move between the two? Is that movement between the two a difficult move? Question.
It's a really interesting question. Do you want to go first?
Okay, for me actually, I guess, when I left university, it seemed to me there were two options in terms of writing. You became a novelist, which meant you wrote novels, of course, or you became a critic, which meant you wrote about other people's novels. And for me, since, as I'm always saying, I'm so sort of hog-tied as a fiction writer by my absolute inability to come up with stories and plots. I just can't think of plots. All I can think of is situations, maybe, but that's it. It's my novels really. It's all
so
just
comforting to hear.
Also, plots are when sometimes friends or trying to get you to read a book and they sort of summarise the plot, and I always just glaze over after the plot is just a bore. Plots are a bore, really. That's what I think as a reader and a writer. Anyway, then I discovered these writers like John Berger and Roland Barthes, who they made available, it seems to me, a space where I really could operate. That is to say, a kind of critical writing that was also creative, form of commentary that would also be imaginative, and I felt that's where I could develop a voice, really. And of course, this is when I'm trying to sort of sell somebody a book. Or when I'm reading a book, it completely depends for me on the voice. I just either like the tone or not. And just to come, when you talk about this distinction between fiction and non-fiction, for me, it's worth bearing in mind that so Geoff in Venice is a novel and it's packaged as that. But the persona here, in this book, it's not really me, Geoff Dyer. It's Geoff Dyer in inverted commas. It's a sort of construct, So it's very, very, it's very sort of labile, that relationship. What else? Just to say.
I thought you were going to be really mean, because I read that book and I loved it, but I thought you were going to be mean, and you're actually really nice.
Yeah, and just the last point I would say is that the yoga book that came out, at one stage I was so pleased with this, it was going to be published as fiction in the States and non-fiction in I think, in the end they went for non-fiction both places for completely sort of mercenary motives, but I liked that very much. The distinction means nothing to me. I think it's much more about the expectations that readers bring to a certain form. That's my two penny worth.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. It seems very non-intuitive to me that when you're describing a book, that the first major thing, is it in the heaven or is it on the earth? Is it fiction or is it non-fiction? Because it just seems like not the most important distinction at all. But commercially, it is the most important. I started out always wanting to write a novel because when I was younger and dumber, I thought that fiction was the free. I didn't want to be constrained by things simply because they'd happened. I thought that I wanted to be able to choose from the whole range of everything. And then I realized when I ended up in graduate school and I started studying history for the same time, America's great at producing people who don't know anything about history and don't think it's important. And in a way, it's a horrible thing, but in a way, it's really kind of remarkable that there is a country like that. Anyway, so that's where I went to school. And so I started reading history for the first time in my mid-20s, and I realized that the things that had actually happened were things that I could not even begin to conceive of, and that the turns and twists that life and history would take were things that actually what I thought of as this freedom to invent was a very constricting thing, because I was limited to the things that I was able to invent, which were based on my really limited, crappy experience. So then I got kind of addicted to this, the ring of the truth and the nature of the truth. That said, when I was writing this book, I really wanted to do it as fiction. It was actually my first New Yorker story ended up to be it was a profile about a Thai kickboxer in San Francisco, and it was on the basis of that I got a literary agent, and she she really wanted me to do a book about the rising women's mixed martial arts scene in America. And what I wanted to do was a novelistic retelling of Dostoevsky's Demons set in a Stanford-like graduate program. So we fought over this for like 3 years, and we would like negotiate and suggest different things. But so in the end, I ended up having to do this as nonfiction because everything in America has to be nonfiction now. A lot of the Tolstoy piece in this book came out first in Harper's. It was fact-checked, and it involves a bus trip between Tolstoy's house and Chekhov's house, where a famous Tolstoy scholar has a bathroom accident. And I would really have preferred to write about that as fiction because it's a real person. I'm now no longer welcome among a lot of Tolstoy conferences, and I understand that. It makes a lot of sense to me. So I would like to be able to, for my next book, I would like to. I'm sure to a greater extent, I'm completely unable to invent plots or think of interesting things. And I don't want to. It feels like a waste. When I was doing that Bobbin story, I initially was assuming I was going to do it as fiction. And then I had just read Philip Roth's The Prague Orgy, where he, it's kind of an Aspirin Papers-like setup where this Yiddish language writer in Czechoslovakia has died with this very small body of work, but then some more stories were discovered, and it's a cross between that imaginary writer is clearly a cross between Bruno Schulz and Isaac Babin, but Roth had to invent him. So I was thinking, okay, I'll have to invent an Isaac Babin-like writer. And then I thought, that's not a good use of my time. I'm not going to be able to invent anything as good as the real thing. And then why should I have to? Because what drew me to that story is how much I love his works, and I want to be able to quote them. I don't want to have to invent quotes that are going to, yeah. So, but I would like to be able to take the kinds of liberties that fiction writers take. So I want the best of everything.